Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, the GCC. We'll look at why the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Arab world's only trading bloc, isn't living up to its name, and how pressing the pause button on economic cooperation is affecting this oil-rich region. Also this week, our plastic economy. It's profitable business, but the true cost to our planet and health is staggering, and it is quite literally washing up on our doorstep. And OMG, it's been 25 years since the world's first text message was sent. And that is something to talk about, given the way the humble SMS has evolved into an entire messaging industry. So, when you're 6 months into a diplomatic crisis that splintered an entire geographical region, an annual meeting of leaders from that region takes on extra significance. But when the Gulf Cooperation Council summit ended abruptly this week, so too did any hopes of a breakthrough in the bloc's biggest crisis in decades. The meeting in Kuwait City was the first since Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE and Egypt cut their trade and diplomatic ties with Qatar in June, a period which, as you'll see in this week's programme, has affected not just diplomatic ties, but economic ones too. More on that after this report from Mohammed Jamjoom.
While the announcement that this year's Gulf Cooperation Council summit would go ahead as planned in Kuwait came as a surprise to many, it also brought renewed hope for a diplomatic breakthrough that might end the Gulf crisis. Upon his arrival in Kuwait on Tuesday, Qatar's Emir, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, issued a statement expressing sincere gratitude toward Kuwait's Emir, Sheikh Sabah Al Ahmed Al Sabah, and his wishes for the success of the current summit, stressing that the current situation in the region required the Council's members to band together against all odds and challenges. But even before the summit officially kicked off, divisions were very much on display. First, the United Arab Emirates announced it had formed a new economic and military partnership with Saudi Arabia that would be separate from the GCC. Then, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Bahrain decided not to send their respective leaders to Kuwait.
It could be that it is embarrassing for some of the leadership of the countries on the quartet, the boycotting countries, to turn up, and therefore they sent a lower level. But it could be that they really just wanted to have this as just to show that the GCC actually still exists and the summit is going to take place, but nothing else is going to happen, which is really disappointing in that case.
In the end, a summit that is usually slated for 2 days ended after only a few hours. Kuwait's Emir said his country will continue mediating in the dispute.
Recent months have seen a lot of troubles, but the wisdom of my brothers, of the leaders of the Gulf countries, managed to calm things down, and our meeting today will lead us to continue playing the role that will live up to the aspirations of our people. In order to have certain mechanisms to sort out disputes with guarantees that will allow everyone to abide by these rules.
Sheikh Sabah added that the Gulf has faced painful and negative developments over the past 6 months due to the rift.
6 months to the day since the beginning of the blockade against Qatar, some here in Kuwait say the fact that representatives of all member countries actually showed up means that this summit should ultimately be considered a success. Others, however, say that today's developments call into question if the GCC, an institution which at its core is meant to highlight regional unity, will be able to survive much longer.
Now, that regional unity Mohammed talks about, it comes over time and through cooperation on a few different levels. The GCC Charter was actually signed 36 years ago by 6 oil-rich monarchies in the Gulf: Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Its stated aim is to be a political and economic alliance. Remember, the GCC countries possess almost half the world's oil reserves, and all are currently putting reforms in place to wean their economies off oil in the future. But plans for greater cooperation haven't amounted to much. Although all countries pegged their currencies to the dollar, back in 2009 there was talk of a monetary union, but Oman and the UAE didn't want a part of it. And the blockade of Qatar has put a stop to free trade within the bloc, putting the future of free movement, trade and capital across the GCC in doubt. There is also a plan to generate new sources of revenue that includes a 5% value-added tax. But again, it was supposed to be across the GCC. That could now also be shelved. So let's talk about all this now with Aham Kamal. He is the head of Middle East and North Africa at the geopolitical risk consulting firm Eurasia Group. And it's nice to have you with us. I mean, the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, cooperation being the operative word, I think. Is it basically just in name only now?
I think virtually we have an organization that is able to do very little. There is no consensus on the major issues, not on foreign policy, not on economics. I think it will remain there in name, but the effectiveness has gone down to almost zero.
And is that just a result of the blockade on Qatar these last 6 months?
The Qatar crisis and tensions between Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Bahrain on one camp, and Qatar on the other, really has created the first step towards partial disintegration of the Union. I think that we still have it there, but I don't think that you're going to hear any headlines on cooperation or any strategy from the GCC anymore.
If we strip out the Qatar crisis for a moment, let's just talk about the fundamentals of the GCC economies. Oil. Obviously, it's all about oil, but the countries did seem to understand, yes, we need to diversify. We might need to bring in a value-added tax or some sort of thing. Were these, or do you think these things were really going to happen, that there was commitment to these sorts of ideas?
I think there was serious commitment towards at least having some form of fiscal rebalancing process across the GCC that really maintained the balance between the Gulf economies. So that was definitely moving forward. As with everything in the region, I think we have to expect that there are some delays, some structural problems. These states have not really introduced any form of complicated taxation for a very long time. So we were bound to really confront difficulties. I think at this stage we get a very different approach. I think we get a state-centric approach, and some states move forward quite quickly with some of these reforms. Others feel more compelled to put them on the sideline. I think in the Qatar case, we will probably see some delays. The Qatari economy has its own set of challenges because of the economic crisis, because of the political crisis with the GCC. So it would be more prudent, I think, to delay that, and I think that's a likely direction.
What are growth prospects like for the other countries in the Gulf, given, as I said, oil is a big factor, and oil is still, $50, $60 barrel mark, which is not what they want. They'd want more, obviously.
We have a new structure where oil prices cannot support the growth levels that we've seen in the past, that we're looking at 2 to 3% growth in most of the countries, perhaps lower if there's a dip in oil prices. But the days of much higher growth are gone, and they will probably not come back.
Aham Kamal, a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us on Counting the Cost. Now, late in the week, we finally saw some tangible movement in the Brexit negotiations between the United Kingdom and the European Union. At this stage, it was about the so-called divorce, which would allow Brexit talks to move to the next stage, pending a vote in the European Parliament. And deals were reached on a number of crucial sticking points, most notably what will be the only land border between them, the one that separates European Ireland from the UK's Northern Ireland. And the end result? There will be no hard border between the two. The EU had insisted discussions could not move ahead until plans for the border were finalised. And so the British Prime Minister Theresa May had been locked in intensive talks with her coalition partners from Northern Ireland, the Democratic Unionist Party, after they vetoed an earlier version of the deal.
After some tough conversations, we've now agreed a settlement that is fair to the British taxpayer. It means that in future we will be able to invest more in our priorities at home, such as housing, schools and the NHS. In Northern Ireland, we will guarantee there will be no hard border, and we will uphold the Belfast Agreement. And in doing so, we will continue to preserve the constitutional and economic integrity of the United Kingdom.
And still to come on Counting the Cost, you've heard of conflict diamonds, but what about peace diamonds? We'll look at how the industry itself is changing and how one of the largest diamonds ever discovered is helping. But first, one of the biggest deals in the TV and film industry could be taking shape. Several sources say that 21st Century Fox and Disney, the world's largest entertainment company, are in advanced talks over the sale of many of Fox's entertainment assets. What does all that mean? Well, More and more people are relying on the internet, of course, for access to things like streaming video. Disney itself is planning on launching its own streaming service in 2019. And this rumoured $60 billion deal with Fox could give it access to some big franchises, things like X-Men and Fantastic Four. And we'll have more on how the streaming industry is changing the media landscape on next week's show in our special focus on streaming wars. Now to one of the biggest corporate corruption cases in history, and the name is Odebrecht. This Brazilian construction company became an international giant through the years by using bribery and corruption to secure around 100 projects in 12 different countries. Now, after Brazil, Peru has been the country with the most arrests related to the Odebrecht scandal, as Mariana Sanchez reports now from Lima.
Odebrecht has been working in Peru since 1979. The car wash investigation in Brazil says Odebrecht financed all candidates who had a chance to become presidents. A congressional commission has been investigating President Kuczynski for allegedly receiving bribes for his presidential campaigns in 2011 and 2016, but the president denies any wrongdoing. Odebrecht's employees, collaborating with Brazilian prosecutors, have only revealed 2 major corruption scandals related to Peru. But analysts say the construction giant got so many public contracts here, there is much more to come.
The European Union has named and shamed 17 countries in its first ever tax haven blacklist. It includes South Korea, Mongolia, Namibia, Panama, Trinidad and Tobago, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. The lists follow the leaking of the Panama Papers and the Paradise Papers as well, which revealed how companies and individuals hid their wealth from tax authorities. But Alex Cobham, the chief executive of the International Tax Justice Network, doesn't believe the EU has judged all countries on the list fairly.
The EU, in the same way that the OECD operates, is much better at looking at non-members than looking at itself. But even with that constraint, it could have applied a level playing field to everyone else. And instead, what it's done really is picked on the smaller, weaker states.
Now, this week, the world's top decision-making body on the environment, that is the UN Environment Assembly, passed a resolution on zero tolerance to plastic pollution in the ocean. Sounds good, but unfortunately, it's non-binding. So the onus really falls on all of us to make it happen. Because in the words of the UN Environment Executive Director, quote, "We're facing an ocean Armageddon." Catherine Soy has the details now from the summit in Nairobi.
Several resolutions were adopted in this hall, including the resolution on plastic pollution that calls for, among other things, a more collaborative effort and the establishment of a committee of experts to look into gaps and regulations and come up with a framework, and also setting up mechanisms, monitoring mechanisms, to measure how much plastic is out there, how much is being dumped, and all this after intense negotiations and perusing through evidence that has been presented by scientists and environmentalists from across the world.
Yeah, this love affair we have with plastic really is toxic. In fact, we have produced as much plastic in the past decade as we did in the entire 20th century. And it's reached a point where we are literally drowning in it. It is carpeting the oceans, it is choking our marine life, and soon, whatever wild-caught fish you eat will contain plastic as well. We will look more at the plastic economy in just a moment, but first here is Mariana Hond with the numbers.
5 trillion pieces of plastic in our oceans, more than 1 million plastic bags used every minute. Millions, trillions. For many of us, these are huge numbers, difficult to comprehend. Well, here's an idea of just how big the problem has become for our planet. 8 million tonnes of plastic ends up in our oceans every year, most of it used just the once and then thrown away. That's the equivalent of a rubbish truck of plastic every minute. At this rate, that will grow to 2 trucks a minute by the year 2030 and 4 trucks going into our oceans every minute by 2050. By which time, by weight, there will be as much plastic, if not more, in our oceans than fish. Plastic, like this, more than 5 trillion pieces, is already there in our oceans, creating these huge garbage patches, the largest of which is floating off the Pacific coast of the United States.
So let's get into this now. Joining us from Brussels is Joan-Marc Simon. He is the Executive Director of the Brussels-based Zero Waste Europe, a European NGO advocating for more responsible waste management. It's nice to have you with us, Joan. Let's talk about the event that happened in Nairobi, first of all, the United Nations Summit. The fact that they came out with a declaration is good, but a non-binding one, is that helpful?
It is helpful because it shows that there is will to go in a certain direction. If we remember climate change from the beginning to where we are now, it took time. So I think there's a consensus that the problem is there, that plastic is a planetary problem. So yes, we have a declaration. Now it's important to turn that into measures, but action needs to take place at the global level, national level, and local level.
Okay, and before we get into that action, I want to actually go big picture with you here and actually a bit of history almost. How did we get to this stage where we became so addicted, if you like, to plastic and the fact that there would be 5 trillion pieces of plastic in our oceans? What was the trigger that made plastic so popular, I guess?
That's a very good question. I mean, as you mentioned, before World War II, we didn't have much plastic in society altogether. I would say there's many factors. I would factor out 3. First of all, plastic is cheap and it's a byproduct of oil refining, which in a way, like, the price is one issue. Second, the throwaway culture, the American way of life, like the associating disposability, the throwaway culture with modernity. So actually like this fast-paced life associated to throwaway culture, that plastic is kind of a very good representative. And thirdly, the intrinsic properties of plastic. It's a material that is durable, is versatile, is lightweight, and also it is a catalyzer. It allows for long supply chains for a globalized economy that we know today. What we see, though, is that the reasons for which plastic became so popular are also the reasons why we have the problem today. And that plastic is not that popular anymore because we're seeing how it's harming the environment, how cheap plastic is also a problem, and also the dangers of actually having these long supply chains because it's having an impact on local production. So yeah.
And does something like, and I'm using this term loosely, but does something like big plastic exist? You know how we talk about big oil and big pharma, these interest groups who keep things going. Is there almost a big plastic, you know, big companies in the US, in the Middle East, in Europe who push plastic's cause?
Absolutely. I would say, I mean, as I said, plastic, 99% of the plastic out there comes from fossil fuels. So actually it's the petrochemical interests that are behind also the plastic production. Also, we have to understand that the margins on plastic production are a lot higher than margins on oil. So the petrochemicals, but also the consumer good companies, of course, have an interest in putting more and more plastic in the market. And if you look at the projections and also the planned investments for the next years, clearly there is an interest in the US, in the Gulf countries as well, and elsewhere to produce more plastic. And somebody will need to deal with this plastic. Someone will need to consume this plastic. So, of course, there's an industry pushing for this.
Joan-Marc Simon, a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Now, next time you send a message on your phone, think about where that started. Services like WhatsApp, they are ubiquitous these days. Sure, Facebook even thought it was worth $19 billion to acquire it. But all this instant messaging actually started 25 years ago this week, when the first SMS text message was sent to a mobile phone. And the rest, as Paul Brennan now explains, is short message history.
25 years ago, human communication changed forever. In the UK, a software engineer used his computer to send the first ever text message to a mobile phone. Just 2 words, Merry Christmas. It was the beginning of a true revolution, a revolution not just in technology, but also in language and the way we communicate. That first text message, or SMS, showed that mobile phones were capable of much more than just voice calls. Today's smartphone apps have their origins all the way back with that eureka moment of the first text. And the limitations of SMS inspired the heavily abbreviated new language, and more recently, the rise of the emoji. Now, in 2007, UK users sent 66 billion text messages. By 2012, it was 151 billion. But by 2015, internet-based text services like WhatsApp and Messenger were overtaking SMS. In 2015, WhatsApp and Messenger together handled 60 billion messages a day. That's nearly 3 times more than the 23 billion texts sent through SMS. And Twitter, of course, a direct descendant of the original SMS, is now the world's window into the mind of the United States president. So has the text message had its day? Well, perhaps, but it'll never really disappear because in an emergency, even if you've got no Wi-Fi and no 3G connection, you can still send a simple text.
Good point, isn't it? Neil Papworth is that software engineer who sent the very first text message. And he says even though the technology has changed, the information conveyed, it's just the same.
We implemented that and managed to get that first text sent back in December 92. And no, it hasn't made me rich. I wish I'd had like 0.00001 of a penny for every text message that's been sent, but unfortunately I don't.
Technology these days, of course, has many uses. Even, it seems, in the fight to stamp out blood diamonds, that is, a diamond mined in a war zone and then sold to fund a conflict. The diamond trade currently still relies on paper-based certification, but that's changing. De Beers, the world's largest supplier of diamonds, says it wants to use something called blockchain technology to provide a traceable record for its gemstones. The platform will trace the diamond's route through the value chain all the way from the mine to the consumer. Now, a blockchain is essentially a ledger or a system of record keeping which chains together all the entries, ones that cannot be changed or copied. It's described as bookkeeping for the digital economy. Blockchain was originally devised for cryptocurrencies, but now technology, financial, retail industries, and as we see, even the diamond industry are finding ways to use that technology. So this is important when trying to root out these blood or conflict diamonds. But have you heard about peace diamonds? One of the largest diamonds ever discovered has been sold at auction in New York this week. And unlike so many others, this one might bring a better life to the people of the village where it was found. Gabriel Elizondo reports from New York.
It sits in a secured room, glistening and ready for sale to the highest bidder, and possibly help the people of the village far away where it was found. This is a 709-carat diamond, thought to be the 14th largest diamond ever discovered. It was auctioned for $6.5 million in New York, but it was about more than the selling price.
But to fully appreciate this gem and realize why it's called the Peace Diamond, you have to look at where it came from.
Here, in the village of Koryardu in Sierra Leone, a place so poor it has no electricity, water, school, or hospital. It was a pastor who found the diamond in the village, and he was in New York for the auction, and still at a loss for words on what it was like to find the diamond.
It was amazing. I cannot able to express how did I feel, because I was not expecting this kind of stone.
He decided to hand it over to the government, a rare decision in a country where diamonds are abundant but often smuggled out of the country. Sierra Leone has a long and bloody relationship with diamonds, as depicted in Hollywood. An 11-year civil war fought partially over the riches from diamonds killed more than 40,000 people. Trying to now use diamonds for good, the government decided to tour the diamond around the world to drum up support for its sale at an auction. Nearly all the money from the sale price will go back to the government to a fund to help villages ravaged by war.
The diamond that was found here is now improving the lives of the people. I think that is the hope and the resilience of us as a nation. So it is very important for us as a nation that indeed, whatever proceeds we are going to garner from this sale is going to complement government's efforts in providing social services for Sierra Leoneans.
One diamond, maybe instead of causing conflict, bringing a little peace and prosperity to the place it was found.
And that is our show for this week. But remember, you can get in touch with us. You can tweet me at KamalAJE and do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do. Or you can just drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is the address. And you can head online to aljazeera.com/CTC. That'll take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links, and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.